Extras, including a scale and free postage to use during your trial. Go to stamps.com/TV and never go to the post office again.
Just 4 months after losing the New Jersey governor's race to Chris Christie, Jon Corzine took over as CEO of MF Global. And today, just 19 months later, the firm has filed for bankruptcy. Corzine's big mistake, buying risky European sovereign debt and counting on bailouts, declaring, quote, Europe wouldn't let these countries go down, but the eventual success of the Euro bailout is still in doubt, and MF couldn't hold on any longer. So why would Corzine or any smart investor bet on bailouts? Did his background as Goldman Sachs chief bias him in any way? Let's ask our panel. We got Gary B. Smith, Francis Newton, and Larry McDonald, who is author of A Colossal Failure of Common Sense, the inside story of the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Any connection here between Lehman and what MF went through?
Well, you know, first of all, let's just say one thing. Some lives are in tatters right now. I lived through this with Lehman Brothers 3 years ago. This is a sad event. I mean, these are real human lives that are disrupted.
Hundreds of jobs.
Hundreds of jobs. Right, and last week, dozens more across the street. People that I know personally. So this is really a
But
hard time.
what was the crux of the mistake? I think the crux is that Corzine was betting on the bailout and betting that the bailout would succeed. Do you agree or not?
Well, I would say one thing around that. The sovereign debt issues, you have a maturity in two years, but it's the wearing of the trade that I think certain people in the market have misjudged, including potentially MF.
But Gary B., again, I think that what Corzine was doing was betting the way any kind of guy from Goldman Sachs would bet. That is, you're going to have a bailout, sovereign debt. There's this old myth that countries don't go bankrupt, companies go bankrupt. I think that goes back to the 70s. Walt Wriston said that at Citibank. And countries do go bankrupt. We saw that with Mexico, we saw it with Argentina, and now we're seeing it with Greece.
Well, David, I'll tell you what, I want to take it from a kind of a trader's perspective. I don't think the bet was that bad. Right or wrong, all right, you know, he was betting on a bailout. Bailouts certainly worked here, if you will. You could have bet on a lot of financial firms, and they certainly came back, like Bank of America and American Express, for that matter. But, you know, I think that what got him in trouble is what always gets traders in trouble. It was the size of the bet and, more importantly, the hubris. Apparently, from what I can tell, he was pretty much flying solo on this, betting a lot bigger than even his risk management people wanted him to. When the trade turned south, as as we're seeing, it took the whole company down. So he's at fault.
There's an expression that Larry just told me: going over your skis. Looking over your skis. Sometimes you could that can happen to people. They make a bad bet and they decide to go further and further. They leveraged this bet. This was a $6.3 billion bet, 2/3 of which were based on betting on Italy and Spain, which have terrible trouble. And then they leveraged it up about 40 times. I mean, this is exactly the mistake that they were making 3 or 4 years ago.
Absolutely. I think one of the things to point out is that when he ran Goldman, you know, things were a lot different at that time in the marketplace. Also, I think it's just a failure to see the big picture and see actually where we are in the cycle of this sort of debt situation. I predicted in January of 2010 that Greece would ultimately default, and that's because of the structure of the debt. So then, of course, I think he knew it was going to default, as we're saying. And betting on a bailout, I mean, how many things can we bail out and how often? And I think if we look at the, I was just
going to say, hold on a second, Larry. I was just going to say that as of Saturday, just last Saturday, he was still betting that these things were going to succeed, that the bet would work out. What planet is he living on?
Well, as you saw with Lehman, the 40 times leverage did the firm in, and they essentially had a balance sheet that was so leveraged. They had these positions that they kept holding and they kept holding, and they added to them. And it's just Lehman married a bad trade. And I think a lot of firms, when they get in trouble, that's what they do.
Gary B., go ahead.
Well, I think Larry hit the nail on the head. The biggest mistake traders do is hang on to the losing trade. Look, in his gut, I am willing to bet Corzine knew this was a bad trade weeks ago. And yet, because of your ego, rather than saying, look, we're going to have to take a big haircut here and let's move on, you want to keep hanging on, and you'd rather be right than make money in this case. And like I said, it took down the whole firm because of his hubris.
Francis, I'm going to come to you more in the next segment that we have with the panel, but I have to ask Larry, how many more MF Globals are there out there, do you think?
Well, I think, I've been on this global lecture tour. I've delivered 42 speeches in 16 countries. And if you look at balance sheets, I mean, investors out there are looking to us for guidance. And in any position that you hold, always just look at the balance sheet, look at the 10K, look at the 10Q, and look at the leverage. It's right there.
So we will see more MF Globals?
Well, I know we're not going to see any more MF Globals anytime soon, I think, in the U.S., but I think there are leveraged companies out there, and as an equity investor, you always have to look at the leverage.
Thanks, gang. Well, no bathroom, no snacks, and no help.